Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew.
What's up?
We wanted to welcome you all to a new season of the Mad Scientist Podcast.
Season 7.
I don't even know what season it is, Marie. This season, we're going to start off with a look into the history of some particular archaeological kind of, finds and things that we find fascinating. In this first episode, we just wanted to talk about kind of the general psychology and background and ideas and things behind treasure hunting. Because really, if there's one thing that's kind of at the common core of all of these stories of people who go out there in the early days of archaeology, it's all of them wanted to get rich.
Treasure!
Treasure is the name of the damn game, Marie. That's what we're going to get into on this episode of the Mad Scientist Podcast. Okay, Jake, roll the tape!
I wonder what Jake, do you think Jake likes treasure hunting? Should we take him with us?
Oh, I'm sure Jake loves treasure hunting. If it's anything like trying to edit out every time I say right or breathe heavily on these shows, I'm sure he loves treasure hunting. I'm sure it's something he's deeply invested in and into.
Jake could come with us with like an iPhone and just be like, look at these morons. God, idiots.
He's going to take out a life insurance policy on either of us and just hope it works out. Yeah. So listeners, for if it wasn't made clear by our introduction, which was one of our least rambling by far, we're doing treasure hunting this episode. We're going to do a little treasure hunting. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So, Marie, lead us off here, Marie. This was your idea for an episode.
Well, yes, and I'm asking you. I'm being an engaging interviewer, and I'm saying, what was your first? Why do you care about treasure? Like, is it like what was your as a young child? Were you out digging up the backyard? Like, what was it?
So
everybody has some story.
Yeah. So
some kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when I was a kid, I was actually obsessed with the idea. So near our house in Staten Island, there is a part of the island so Staten Island is famous for two things, and neither of them are good. It's famous for raising and creating the I don't know, I hesitate to call it a soup, but I guess kind of like the disgusting goop from which the Jersey Shore show came about, and all those cast members essentially were raised and born.
Ah, yes.
So that's one thing that Staten Island is famous for. The other thing that Staten Island is famous for is a dump. Staten Island was the largest dump in I want to say North America or even the world potentially. I'm not 100% sure on that, but when I was a kid, I remember in school they would tell us that the dump is so big it can be seen from space. It's one of 3 or 4 things that can be made out specifically from space. One of which was the Staten Island dump, the Great Wall of China, and Mount Rushmore. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm sure the thing is that the dump is big, but it's I don't know. It takes up a third of the island, and the island is pretty damn big. Staten Island is the biggest part of New York City. But anyways, whatever.
I bet there's treasure in that dump.
Well, so here's the thing, right? When I was a kid, attached to the dump, so on Staten Island, as you're going to the dump, the dump is kind of on the left-hand side of this road that I'm thinking of. And so, but there's kind of a marsh in between there. So there's a lot of land separating the dump from the rest of the island, kind of. And the Staten Island Mall is right across the way from the dump. But so...
First of all, you are doing wonders for Staten Island tourism.
Oh, sure, it's great. There's no reason to visit. Please don't. So the only reason to visit Staten Island is to get a chicken roll from Sal and Lloyd's Pizza Place in Eltingville. The only reason. Anyways, nice. So the dump is across from the mall, but then from the dump, there's a river that kind of has runoff coming from the dump. It's not really a river. It's more like swampy wetland. Staten Island is very like other parts of New York and New Jersey and kind of that part of the East Coast. It's very swampy. There's a lot of marshland and stuff. So the water from that kind of got, I guess, mingled with the waste and the toxic chemicals and whatever. And so it created this area that it's completely off limits from people. Like there are these fences up, and when I was a kid, there were these signs that said, don't go here. It's toxic waste and whatever. And there's a paper plant that also was giving off pollution, like a paper mill.
Oh,
so anyways, so when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the idea that in this area, in this part of Staten Island that we're not allowed to go to, that there was something there. I don't know if it was treasure, if it was a UFO, if it was, Bigfoot, like a Bigfoot party, this disgusting part of land, as opposed to it just being like, death from toxic shock syndrome or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that was kind of my thing was I had this very like romantic view as a kid that I'm going to go find this treasure someday because it's right here. And the weirdest thing too, Marie.
It's off limits.
The weirdest thing too.
You can't go there.
There's
first thing you're doing, man.
There's a parkway, the Korean War Veterans Parkway, was supposed to continue at some point. And so there's actually an overpass. It's like a highway that connects the outer bridge going to Jersey to the highways that become it connects to another, like by the mall essentially on Staten Island. That highway though initially would have continued onto an overpass. Then when I was a kid, I never put this together. It's just an empty overpass. It doesn't go anywhere. It's an overpass that goes up and it goes into that part of it looks like it goes into that part of the island that I'm talking about that's like toxically polluted, but it doesn't. It's just empty up there. So anyways, so there was a lot of mystery there and like, it seemed interesting.
Oh yeah.
There was no reason to think there was any treasure there or anything, but yeah, I thought that was like my first, I'd say, career plan. Was find that treasure there.
Was to map out that area and then get the bolt cutters, right? Get the bolt cutters and clip your way through the fence.
Yeah.
Right? With your backpack on and go and dig for treasure.
Right. I probably would have been murdered like, by by some kind of, criminal living out there or something. I don't know. No idea. Anyways, what was your first take on treasure hunting, Marie?
Oh my God. Well, it's like, I know that I always talk a lot about Star Wars, but I think like growing up as a kid, I was obsessed with the Indiana Jones movies. I loved the Indiana Jones movies. And I think it's just like, again, it's just this huge, to your point, this romanticized view of whatever this is that, you're going and you're finding something and there's clues and there's obstacles, but, through sort of perseverance, you're able to figure this stuff out. And I remember like thinking, oh my God, being an archaeologist would be such an awesome, like that's a really cool career. And Adrian McCarthy, who was in my class, was such a buzzkiller. And he was like, well, it's nothing like Indiana Jones, so you shouldn't think it was like that. And I was like, shut up, Adrian, I know that. And it was like kind of heartbreaking because I kind of hoped it was like Indiana Jones, as an archaeologist, kind of, yeah, because that's what he did in the movie. So I was like, yeah, that would be a good job. And Adrian had to go and just kill it for me. So thanks, bud. But that was like the big thing that I really loved, and I love that movie. And also Goonies, right? The kids' movies Goonies. I remember even watching that like, in college and just being like, there's so much wrong with this movie. There's so many stereotypes. There's so much really kind of not good stuff in this movie, even though especially because it's Spielberg. But I'm just like, oh my God, I just want them to find the treasure of One-Eyed Willie's and just save their house. And I was so like, it was just, again, it's just like, this over romanticized idea of something that is unknown and how you and your group of scrappy friends are going to be able to go and find it is something that's so appealing to that. And so like, that's sort of one of the things that I started to think about too, when, we were talking about treasure hunting. And even with your story, it's like, okay, clearly that area was in Staten Island. It was probably not safe.
No.
Hygienic.
No.
Scenic. Or even, just, it was probably just awful. But like how, you as a young kid, like kind of romanticized it and was like, yeah, I bet there's something buried there. I bet there's something. If you go in there, they're hiding something because they don't want you to know. But if you persevere, you're going to be able to find that out. It's like, what is that type of psychology? So that got me thinking about, in talking about treasure hunting, like, what is the type of psyche or psychology that treasure hunters have? Because there are people that actually do this for a living, even today.
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah. So we say for a living. We, it's a little bit hand waving there.
That's what they do with their parents' money, right? Or with their trust fund.
Yes.
Right?
A lot of these people.
We're saying that.
Yeah, a lot of these people, at least historically, start out with money somehow, or they are very convincing. I mean, essentially con men.
Quote unquote. Salespeople. Yes.
Salespeople.
Salespeople. Yeah.
Where they can kind of convince, they can convince a rich person that, listen, I have this map, I have this idea, we're going to find it, whatever. In the modern day, it's almost more, because there are still people that consider themselves, I think, in the modern day, are people that would, like, Ancient Aliens is a really good example of that. You have these, jackasses going around trying to find lost treasure, or trying to find lost sites or whatever. And, every once in a while you'll get stories like this. Like there was one a couple of years ago about a Canadian kid who said that he had found a new Mayan site using Google Earth. He was just like, well, look, this square could never have existed otherwise. And then a bunch of archaeologists came out and just like crapped on him. And they were like, that's nope. But people still do that kind of stuff, and it's weird.
Well, hey, look at the Curse of Oak Island now on History Channel for how many seasons now?
Yeah.
How many seasons is this now? 17, 18 seasons?
I don't know.
Something,
it's ridiculous. Right? Yeah, it's completely ridiculous.
I mean, it is ridiculous. But I mean, come on. We've discussed this before in some of our way back episodes, and, just in general. I mean, you can't tell me that if you start thinking about it and you start reading about it, you're like, yeah, man, you know what? That sounds like something that's out there. And I know in my heart of hearts that if it was up to me and I had the wherewithal and the licenses or whatever to go onto that island, I would just be like, let's just nuke it. Let's just bomb this thing, split it in two, and see what's underneath it. Because again, I am not. That's the thing that's awful about treasure hunting, is I think it starts off with this kind of idea of, again, this romanticized hunt, an intellectual process that you are going to research and study clues. But really what it comes down to is like almost hardcore pillaging, right? Like you're going to have to, and what's happened sort of again in Oak Island is they've basically, from at least the last 100 years, just torn the island, torn it apart, trying to find something. Area.
Yeah, right?
And, they found weird stuff. There's something going on there, but I mean, it doesn't speak to your better nature. I think is again, like,
it's similar.
The one thing that's really strange.
It's a very, I think, it is an intensely, I think, sort of Western view of the world too. That we, even if we did find it, right? If they find that treasure, should it belong to them? I mean, it's kind of that idea. I think it's kind of that idea too. I mean, we see this a lot with other kind of cases of, say, mysteries, right? The one that springs to mind always with these types of discussions is the people who claim to have alien skulls or mummies that are just the remains of indigenous people.
Yes.
That they claim, no, this is an alien, but it's not. It's just some poor person's remains, Yeah. It's like a crazy thing to think that we know better than...
Right.
No. I know what this is. I'm an expert at this. I've been doing this for 2 months. Yeah. Anyways, all right. So what is it that we think drives us to do this kind of stuff? What makes us want to do this?
I think there's a couple things. And one of the things that I was reading about was saying that we have sort of this inherent tendency to seek out or to see patterns, right? And so we could argue that this is almost evolutionary, right? That if you can see a pattern that is a face, that it is something that you can try and relate to, right? Or if you can see something that is hostile, or if it could be a threat, you know how to react to it. But people intuitively try to rationalize and to create patterns in pretty much everything. So that's normal. I think that that's, again, a normal human process. I think the problem is that you can also go the complete opposite direction and begin to see patterns in everything. So you can begin, and this is confirmation bias. This is sort of the conspiratorial mindset is I can make an association from one thing to another, to another, to another, and none of these things will have anything in common. But I can create one narrative between all of them to get to an end goal that may or may not have any type of rational or logical basis. And so again, this is especially true when you start to talk about treasure. So if I've got a treasure map, and again, let's just use Oak Island because it's so good to use Oak Island for. So I mean, there's a million different things that people have said that's buried on Oak Island. So here's this little island, this little strange little island off the coast of wherever, in Canada, and it has everything from the Grail, or not the Grail. Yes, the Grail. They think the Grail might be there. The lost works of Shakespeare. Perhaps it's Mayan gold. It's like, so none of those things are the least bit associated with one another, except for the fact that they are of some huge, unattainable, almost unknowable value, right? The works of Shakespeare, a religious artifact, gold from an ancient civilization. So what's the narrative that would put any of those three things on that island? What's the recipe that somebody has to go through, the machinations that you mentally have to go through to get to that endpoint? And that's what I think is almost incredible of anyone's mind, because you'll do it, and you won't even know you do it. You're like, yeah, you see that cross? That cross looks like a Rosicrucian cross from ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. It's there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do that kind of stuff all the time, right? I mean, it's I think part of, like you said, part of it is the pattern, in that pattern forming thing, right? The one example of this I always like to tell people to think about, because this actually, when I was a kid, I remember reading about this in a book, and I don't remember what book it was, but I remember reading about this in a book, and I was like, oh, I don't know, do I do that? And then this is kind of a silly, embarrassing story. The bathroom where I was reading said book in, as a toddler, or not a toddler, but like a kid, whatever, middle school, whatever the heck it was, like Elmo on the potty on that, on that GIF.
Whatever. I was 32. Whatever it
was last week. The door is wood. And so in the patterns in the wood, if you look long enough, you start to see faces and little images and whatever. Yep. Just because your brain picks out the patterns, right? What's interesting, I think, is what you're saying, which is that further leap of, because it doesn't just take, I think it takes a great deal of pride as well, or kind of self-assurance, to not only think that these patterns exist and to ignore all other possible connections to them, but also to think that you have some part in the story to play, right? That you're the one, you, Bill, the auto mechanic from Boise, you're the one who's gonna, break this one open.
Yes. Well, and
it's a weird kind of pride, I think.
And it is very much so I want to say, again, almost this neo-colonial sort of entitled attitude, especially when you're talking about an indigenous treasure if it does not belong to you in the first place, which we'll be going into later. But I think it's this idea of, of it being an observational bias, right? And so there's something called the streetlight effect or the drunkard search, which is sort of that people only search for something where it's the easiest place to look. So there's this well-known joke that a policeman sees a drunk searching for something under a streetlight and asks what that drunk has lost. He said he's lost his keys. So they both search under the streetlight together. After a few minutes, the policeman asks if he is sure that he lost them under the streetlight. And the drunk replies, no, he lost them in the park. The policeman says, well, why are you searching under the streetlight? And the drunk replies, well, this is where the light is. So, and I think that is actually pretty much a very good, sort of, again, a good observational biased example that you could use with treasure hunting. Because basically you're looking where you have created the most narrative as well, right? I mean, again, like I'll keep picking on Oak Island, but you keep finding things that, yes, they're strange, but you keep enforcing why they're strange because you keep building a case for it. Like, oh yeah, we found this coin. And it was buried X amount of underground, or right. We had to dig and there might be there could be reasons for it to be there that aren't treasure hunting oriented, but that's not nearly as soon as you start to add up like anything else you find, you start to create a stronger narrative for that as well. It's part of this overall thinking too, or this kind of general error that happens in these kinds of cases where we see, we talked about it when we talked about the Morgellons episode, where you as a person every day filter out a lot of information. And some of that information you filter out is stuff on your body, even stuff you may not recognize as being filtered out, or you wouldn't think you'd normally filter out. So one day you start looking at your skin and you're like, oh my crap, what is this mole? When did I get a mole? And that thing must have been growing for months and months, but you just never realized it. In the case of someone with Morgellons, they make the jump to think something must have caused this to happen quickly. And what is it? And then they start to look and they start to see, well, look, there's like stuff on my skin that I don't like, shouldn't be there, right? What's this thread? What's this, what's this little scab? What's this cut? What's this, on and on and on and on and on. It's the same thing with UFO sightings, right? If you think that you are prone to UFO sightings, you will have lots of UFO sightings, because everything in the sky that normally you would just filter out suddenly becomes important and interesting and valid. Every drone, every single space station, every single star, every single plane, every single whatever becomes meaningful to you. It's the same thing here. And it actually, I think, goes into some of I think some of our favorite treasure hunting stories. But first off, speaking of treasure hunting, Marie, it's time for a word from our sponsors. Absolutely. Ba-dum-ts. I gotta tell you, Cogs. All right. I don't care who knows it. I love the treasure hunting. And I know that there's a lot of baggage. I know there's a lot of baggage that goes with it. It's not good. I'm not proud to say it, but I do love it. I love all of it. I think one of the things that kind of is interesting too, but maybe helps endear treasure hunting to people, is that there is a lot of religious undertones to the idea of the treasure hunt. Besides the fact that, a lot of your most famous hunts are for religious iconography, right? There's also the idea that you are going on a quest and you are sort of almost using or searching for a higher power to guide you on this journey, right, of something that is the unknown, that the uninitiated aren't supposed to see. Like, all of these other people will fail, and you will be the one that succeeds through faith, right? Through being the true believer, the leap of faith will get you to the knowledge, right? Which is, there is an answer. So at the end of all these clues, if you're following the dotted line on your treasure map, and you're leaping over the pit of alligators, and you're swinging across the jungle, X is the answer, and that answer is the height, is, you know, almost to this point of almost, you know, a godlike vision of something, right? It's something huge.
Yeah, definitely.
Or the treasure.
Yeah, it certainly plays into our fantasies, I think, of being, first off, just being an important person in history. If you're the guy who discovers, you know, a lost book in the Bible, or, you know, the Holy Grail, or any of these kind of religious, you know, the second menorah, or any of these kind of, besides, again, like this religious iconography or whatever, but if you're the person that discovers something that has been hidden or has been lost for some time, first off, your name immediately goes into the history books in some ways. Unless you're the guy that discovers the Dead Sea Scrolls, in which case you just like sell them and no one knows who the heck you are. But anyways, the important thing, or I guess kind of, I think there is a part of it that is this idea of it immediately thrusts you into history in an important way. And it also, like you said, has these parts to it, or these kind of motifs of, you know, a knight or a learned person or someone on a mission, on a quest to get ultimate knowledge. Yeah. It is a true, it's a quest in its truest forms. And actually that's part of, I think, one of my personal favorite versions of this myth, which are those kind of religious Templar-esque fantasies.
Oh yeah.
Where it is again part of this idea that the people in the past could speak to us in the future, or had planned this in some way. They'd planned for us to get this information. That's kind of a crazy, I mean, if you think about it, that in itself is sort of a wild thing to suppose. You know, it's part of, there's these, there's like a list of 12 or 15 or something, what are they called? Like mental, not disorders, but like a mental, like an error in thinking, an error in logic, you know?
Yeah.
And so
she should be looking out for.
And so there's but there are things that, that's the thing. There are things that people do all the time, right? But there are things that you don't recognize you do, right? So one of them is like catastrophizing, or jumping to conclusions, or
like biases.
Right, yeah, like assuming that assuming you know the intentions and the beliefs of other people immediately without ever talking to them, right? So, you know, an example of that would be you go to the store, you buy something, you say kind of a weird joke to the guy who's, you know, checking you out at the register, and then you leave, and later on in the day you're like, oh my God, that was so embarrassing, that guy must have thought I was an idiot. Well, that guy didn't hear you. You know, he just assumed you said, have a good one, and he doesn't think about you anymore at all. But in your brain,
or he does think you're just a total whack.
Well, whatever, right? But still, you have no evidence to support that idea. So why do you think that? And it's just because you're making this kind of normal mental error in processing. It's kind of like it's one of those, but taken to the extreme, where you think that because you are reading a pattern in something, or seeing some hidden meaning, that it must exist. It must be there in the first place. When really you're just picking patterns out of random. I mean, so my favorite treasure story is the Knights Templar.
Oh God, I love that one.
And so my favorite one of these actually comes
Come on,
from,
man, that's a good one.
It is a very good one, right? So for those that don't know, the Knights Templar they were a religious sect back during the Crusades. If you don't know
the Knights Templar and you're listening to us, please.
Yeah, I don't.
Please, people.
Yeah, I don't really know what you're doing here, but
I'm sorry.
Anyways, they were a religious sect that gained a lot of power. They essentially were kind of some of the first banks, some of the first money lenders, money borrowers, that kind of stuff, right? And so by doing this, and by helping to kind of help travelers they almost started up the first version of insurance in some ways. And so the way that this happened, or essentially what happened, was they built up this, what's the word? They essentially created this system of like 1,000 or something, like fortifications, like forts around between Europe and the Holy Land. And, at these places you could come and you could like borrow money, or you could stay and be safe, and you could keep your money from when you got back or whatever. And essentially they became
basically
like
it's the Crusades.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's so the Ottoman Empire does not take all of your, it's a safeguard against the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened though is that they were in cahoots with the Pope and the church at some point, and then a new Pope comes into power, Pope Clement V. So eventually what happens, so they build up this kind of big like almost a corporation, almost this big company. Mm-hmm. And what essentially happens is that there's kind of a long-winded political disagreement between the Pope and the King of France and the Templars and this other group. And essentially what occurs is that the King of France decides that all the Templars are going to be killed. He's gonna murder all of them. Yeah. And so he comes up with these charges that say they are blaspheming, they're like doing this crazy stuff to crosses and relics and whatever and all this stuff. And so they behead them. They behead the leaders of the Templars. But so the theory goes that the Templars had some from the Crusades, from their protection of people, from being in the Holy Land, that they must have gotten or did get important religious relics of one sort or the other. So there's a famous book that's actually a famous hoax that we have to do an episode on someday called Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Oh my God. My God. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like a super hoax. It's like a super duper hoax. But anyways,
it's good.
Theories will abound about what the hidden treasure of the Templars was and where it went. And so one theory is that the Templars' treasure is the Holy Grail itself. Others are that it is the Ark of the Covenant. It is Jesus's bloodline. It is a child that Jesus fathered and then continued down the ages. That's kind of what's in Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Others are there's all kinds of ones, right? And so the Templars, because they have this kind of mythical proportionality given to them, are said to have reached, they reached the United States, they reached Asia, they reached, Atlantis, they reached wherever, right? The Templars have been everywhere.
Well, and exactly. They have no limits, right?
Yeah.
They became almost this, the Knights of God, right? It's like they were like the archangels on earth type of thing, safeguarding the relics.
Yeah. Now, what gets into this thing that we were talking about before is this religious commune called Rennes-le-Château, which is in southern France. This kind of little chateau, right? This area, this kind of religious monastery, I guess, for lack of a better term, has all kinds of crazy iconography all around it. It's got an altar to Mary Magdalene. It's got it's got like skulls and memento mori and crossbones and these wacky statues and stuff and all this word. Like there's a inscription on one of the columns that says "Terribilis est locus est," which says this place is terrible. That's above the church entrance. There's
I'm telling you.
There's the demon Asmodeus.
Just want to dig into all of it.
Well, what's
right?
crazy?
Of course, there's something awesome.
What's crazy
there.
is that there are also all these other pieces of iconography of demons. So one of the famous ones is the demon Asmodeus is holding up on his back actually the holy water font. So as you come into a Catholic church, there's an area where there's holy water. You're supposed to go and bless yourself, and then you can go into the church. In this chateau, it's a demon holding up that water font. So it's interesting and it's strange and it's weird, but people have read all kinds of stuff into it. As opposed to just being like, maybe this guy was like a really early adopter of Hot Topic. Like maybe this guy was just into spooky stuff. Maybe whoever designed this was going wild.
Emo?
Yeah, like maybe he was just going crazy. It's Skrillex's great.
He was like, what we need?
I don't know.
We need more skulls. You guys, we need some skulls. I'm telling you, it's gonna look good.
I mean, it could be anything, right? But people read into this that it's this long, through the centuries meaning, and every year people are like, oh, there's new meaning to this because today the heart symbol means this, and it's just people build meaning, and it doesn't actually mean anything as far as we can tell to this day. I mean, it has meaning, of course. Someone did it, it seems like, on a purpose, but trying to figure out what that purpose was is, it takes serious archaeology. It's not like,
right.
I don't know, your uncle.
Historic context.
Yeah, your uncle isn't going to do it in his basement.
You can't appropriate your Western 21st century, sort of nomenclature and thought process to it, right? It's like it means something for that time, and it doesn't mean the same thing today. And I think that's really hard to remember, even though it's really apparent, right? If you see a owl in like Japanese storytelling, it doesn't mean wisdom, right? It means something else.
Yeah.
It has everything has a different lens on it that is not going to be readily apparent to you if you are not, if you don't have that sort of translator for it.
Yeah. It's
but that doesn't mean that the Grail's not there, because it totally is, dude.
It's totally there.
This is the kind of stuff I love, right? Because it's like it's such an easy little step to get from like, yeah, no, everything makes sense up to this point, and then you just take that one little step, and you're right in there with the Knights Templar, hiding Jesus' son or whatever.
It's a long walk, but it's not a long walk, if you know what I mean. It's not a long walk to the first step, I guess I'd say.
It's not a long walk, but it's pretty fun. It's pretty entertaining.
What's your favorite?
How it could happen.
What's your favorite mystery, Marie? Your favorite lost treasure?
Oh man, my favorite lost treasure. Well, we've talked like I'm kind of a fan of all of them in some ways. Like I do love the fact that you have Oak Island. We've already done a million different things about Oak Island, but you have this one place people just keep digging and just keep trying to tear up. It's got to be in here somewhere. No, it's not in the money pit. All right, we're gonna look in deep bore, whatever it is, 9, and no, it's not there. And we just keep getting the technology just keeps amping up. Right, they keep like bringing in the newer, the better, the bigger, the faster. Whatever it is to find out whatever's on this island, and it's just like, nope, you should maybe try the swamp.
Yeah, what's funny, like it really does make you wonder though, right? In 100 years, let's say they find nothing, in 100 years, are we going to be like, there's 1,000-foot deep hole. We're still going. They could have gotten down here. They had a lot of shovels back in the day. It just seems to me like at what point. And this is a question we get into a lot, or a question that I think about a lot, I guess, is at what point does a mystery stop being worth investigating? Like I think about like, so I think, and I don't know if you had the same, or if you even remember this.
Isn't that the question about answers? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there was a period of time in like the 90s, maybe like late 80s, like mid 90s, early 2000s, where I felt like everyone was opening vaults on TV or looking.
Oh my God, I loved it. Yeah.
Or looking for like lost Egyptian mummies or, whatever.
Oh, yes. Or Jimmy Hoffa's tomb.
Yeah, Jimmy, right? Al Capone's vault, right?
Al Capone's vault.
Was the Rivera one that was famous.
Oh my God.
There was another one too. Like the History Channel's done a couple of these over the years, if I remember correctly, where it's like, that there's this one guy who's got like a stranglehold on Egyptian antiquity studies. What is his name or whatever? It doesn't really matter at this point, but anyways, this guy is always on these shows and he's like, oh, we're going to look into the sarcophagus, or we're going to look into the tomb of the pharaoh and we're going to see what we see. And I'll never forget, they had this LED, like not an LED, but like I guess maybe an LED, or like a fiber optic camera that they fed the fiber optic camera through this little hole. It was an air shaft that supposedly looked into the tomb where there would be stuff. And when they pushed it through, it just hit a rock. And they were just like, well, there's a rock. There's a rock. We can't do anything else. We can't go any further than that. There's a rock there. And it's like, I stayed up. I convinced my mom to let me stay up until 11 o'clock at night.
Of course.
To see a rock.
Of course she did. Yeah.
Ridiculous, Marie.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's it, though. It's like, when do you call it quits in your head? Or when does your head let you call it quits? Because I mean, again, confirmation bias, things you'll be able to explain why that rock is there and why that's part of the narrative if you're bought in enough to the conspiracy of it, right? And so that's where I think people have a problem letting go, because I also think it's tied to there are certain things that are just going to be unknowable, which drives me personally crazy. Well, right? I don't like that. I hate that idea.
You also, though, get to a point, too, where the gambler's fallacy starts to become involved, right?
Yeah.
I didn't find the Oak Island treasure in this hole. It'll be the next one. I'm due.
It'll be the next one. Yep.
I'm due.
Yep.
And, yeah, it's crazy. I don't know, man. So, God, listeners.
I think that's I know, but we're not done, listeners. We're not done. We're going to take it a step further. Because again, like Chris says, the gambler's fallacy. Just because we didn't discover a treasure in this episode doesn't mean that we're not going to in the next episode or the episode after that. Because hear me now, Christopher Cogswell, we're finding treasure.
Oh, we're going to find it, absolutely.
And we're finding treasure. I've identified the treasure. We're going to read the clues, and then we are going out. If we're gonna, I'm gonna find some shovels or some stuff in our backyard. I'm getting in the van, picking you up, quitting the jobs, and we're finding treasure.
Dear listeners, this episode we talked about what it takes or what the thinking is behind being a treasure hunter in some ways. Next episode, we're going to delve into the history of those folks who kind of did it.
Kind of maybe sort of did.
They did it. They did it. They looked for treasure. I don't know if they found any, but they looked for it, which will be great. Great. It was weird. It was great. It was great. I thought it was good. Yeah, maybe we should. Yeah, I think it was good. I'm excited for next episode. Yeah. Hell yeah. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.